Hello and welcome to the CBB Supershow presented by the world famous FTN Network. I'm your host, Walt Waddell, aka Dub Deuce 85, and I know if you're hanging out with me, you're a true grinder, a true diehard, because we're not talking about the DFS betting stuff, although we're getting ready for it. We're doing the legwork, we're preparing. We're talking about college basketball off-season stuff, transfer portal, coaching changes, all this stuff happening, current events, you name it, we're talking about it. We're going conference by conference, doing our thing, talking about it. We've broken down the Big East. We've talked about that in depth. We went through, and now we're going to talk about the Pac-12. We did some mid-major stuff. We talked about, all these various changes and how they're going to apply and to DFS, and really just kind of doing this work now so we have an idea of the roster, who's going to be relevant, who's going to be popular, who's going to be sneaky, so that when the season rolls around and it's, Halloween, you're out trick-or-treating with your kids, you come back in and bam, we're into that college basketball season. You won't have a lot of catching up to do, a lot of legwork, because you already did all it. I presented you with the information and you're ready to rock and roll. So I appreciate those of you who continue to grind with me and hang out with me and really, support the show. We're continuing this momentum and doing our thing in the off season, continuing to do USFL content. This Friday, WNBA season starts, so we'll have daily content there, not only from a DFS perspective, but prize picks. Did quite well last year in prize picks. Also going to be doing some betting stuff, and there may be some WNBA shows from now and then that happen as well. WNBA DFS, definitely a profitable sport for us. Then we'll glide into TBT, which will be prize picks and betting opportunities there. The show will flip to college football previews. There's a ton of college football stuff that I've been keeping up on. We'll be doing that for about a month as we coast into the college football season. And then we'll be doing the weekly shows, breaking down each slate. My guy, Jake Kuchek will be back in the house doing his thing with me. We'll have some guest appearances from some other people as well. But all summer long, I'm going to be here with you every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. PST, midnight EST, talking about some form or fashion of a niche sport, whether that's college football, whether that's college basketball, or the WNBA, USFL, CFL, TBT, whatever it is, you name it, we're going to do it. Tonight, we're going to talk about the Pac-12. We're going to go in depth about the moves the Pac-12 has done. The Pac-12 has been a absolute, bottom feeder of a league compared to the other, power conferences such as the Big East, the Big 12, the SEC, hell, even the Big 10. I know that they're always getting talked up, but they struggle in the tournament. The Pac-12 tends to be a little bit of an underperformer. However, they are a bit top heavy, and they tend to have a team that makes a deep tournament run regardless of how bad the overall conference is. But from top to bottom, it's obvious. We can't really argue against it. It's not a very good conference at all. However, moves have been made here since the offseason has started to make this conference look a lot better on paper. We're seeing a ton of moves and some programs that look quite good, quite competitive, and I'm really intrigued and interested to see how it's going to go. There's a ton of stuff happening with the draft still. There's, G League camp just ended. There's NBA Combine stuff. Janai Broom of Auburn, man, he might be gone, it sounds like, but there's a lot of stuff happening. Keep it in the Pac-12 with UCLA guys, and we're still going to see who comes and who goes, so a lot of stuff to determine there. And then there's going to be European foreign trips. We're going to track those because that's how we knew heading into it that Brandon Miller and not Mark Sears was going to be the guy for Bama. Brandon Miller came into it, a highly ranked recruit, but everybody was gaga over Mark Sears, crushed it from Ohio. Mark Sears. But during the foreign trip, Brandon Miller went absolutely bonkers all of their games. Knew coming in he was going to be a stud. He wasn't priced correctly. He went nuts. We used him. Then he became a high price guy. Everybody knew him. But just that little bit of edge buys you 2, 3, 4 slates of huge profitability. And that's what we're going to be looking at all summer long and tracking those foreign trips. All right, so the Pac-12, and by the way, before we get into it, let's talk about the big news of today is Caleb Love, who chooses to transfer to Michigan. It was a weird fit. Nobody really liked it, I don't think, but Juwan Howard, with his back against the wall, bringing in a name value in Caleb Love to at least put the program in a position where they can, sell tickets and have some excitement about a big name player like that. Didn't really fit in with that group. Juwan Howard, he's really, every year he's sending high school kids to the NBA. He's trying to reload as fast as he can, but he's being handcuffed. The admissions department for Michigan last year, Terrence Shannon just, his credits didn't transfer over. He was going to go to Michigan, couldn't go. He ends up going to Illinois instead, has a great season. Now fast forward 1 year later, we're in the exact same position. Caleb Love, his credits do not transfer over. Admissions department says, no, Caleb Love can't go to your school. So Caleb Love has to go back into the portal. He will no longer be going to Michigan, and now Michigan's in real big trouble. Their roster was already pretty suspect, but now not having Caleb Love and this late into the process, there's some guards available, of course, but they're definitely not necessarily a plethora of good program-changing players, elite-tier players. So Michigan might be in for a rough season. And at first I thought, Juwan Howard, what's he doing? He's ruining this Michigan program. What the hell is he doing? But now after today, I see it's not Juwan Howard's doing. It's the admins, it's the boosters, it's the lack of NIL. So here, Juwan Howard, he's sending kids to the NBA draft each and every year. So he should still be able to get recruits in that regard, right? Now, people transfer, whatever, but he can't get transfers, high-quality transfers to come because the admissions department, they're not allowing it to happen. And then the NIL, Hunter Dickinson comes out and said what we already suspected for Michigan players. He barely got paid anything compared to some of these other players. And, as much as he would have liked to stay at Michigan, so he says, Hunter Dickinson, so take it with a grain of salt, he has to go somewhere he's going to get paid. We know Kansas. We know Bill Self. They were paying people well before NIL became a thing. And they have no problem paying Hunter Dickinson a large sum of money, and that they did. So that's really a big setback. Michigan, they have a great football team. They have a solid basketball team. They're definitely a program that should have money. They're not Seton Hall. Like, they are a program whose NIL should be really high. They should be able to get players. They should be able to set them up with brand deals, whatever it takes, man. But they're handcuffing Juwan Howard, not allowing him to get transfers in. He's already dealing with one and dones. There's no continuity with this roster. This Michigan roster, my friends, is really, really bad. Without Caleb Love now, it's a problem. I know this is going to be the Pac-12 show, but I really got to hit on this because it's dangerous territory that Michigan's heading into, and there are guys available. And after the draft deadlines and stuff, there'll be some guys that they can get after. But we're looking at a roster here. Trey Jackson and Namari Burnett as their primary two transfers. As much as I love Namari Burnett, I don't know that he's going to be able to carry the load. Trey Jackson was like 7th, 8th option on Seton Hall. Doug McDaniel's going to have to do big things. Terrace Reed's going to have to do big things. Terrence Williams, we'll see what kind of output he can do this year. I'm not a big believer in Will Schwetter, obviously. Yusuf Kayat. They do bring in a number 93 out of the ESPN Top 100, George Washington III. This program's in trouble. Jalen Llewellyn, who was injured last year after being a transfer, I don't know his status and if he's going to be able to get approved for another year for a medical redshirt or whatever, but they certainly need him because this is dire straits for this Michigan program. And I got to tell you, I was a little bit overreactive about how Juwan Howard was at fault. I now believe the administrators, the NIL, the boosters, all that stuff are at fault here for why Michigan is going to be so awful this season. All right, so that was the big news. Let's get into the Pac-12, guys. Let's kick it off here with the Arizona Wildcats. Arizona has a situation where they lose Kerr Kriisa to West Virginia. We know that. Cedric Henderson, 5th, 6th year guy, he's out. Courtney Ramey is out of eligibility. Azulis Tubelis going professional level. And then Adama Ball, who is a player I really liked, a younger guy that I thought actually could do quite well. I thought him coming back for another year would have been interesting. There just wasn't, I guess, the development for him that he would have liked. Instead, he transfers to Santa Clara. I'll be very interested to watch him there, especially after our guy Pods just tore it up at Santa Clara and is tearing it up at the NBA Combine, by the way. Absolutely dominant. But he's gone. So those are who they lose. Pele Larson has declared for the draft doing things, but I don't think it sounds like he's going to stay in the draft. So expect Pele Larson to come back. Expect Omar Ballo to come back. So without Tubelis in the mix, Ballo could potentially be like an 18-12 guy, like a big Oscar Tshiebwe-like season. So I do like Ballo in the mix there. Kylan Boswell, expect a big step forward by Kylan Boswell. He's Boswell's going to be the primary guy with the ball in his hands. They do return Dylan Anderson, who's at least a decent enough guy. Henry Visar, a dude like him could easily step into the Tubelis role as well. He was a pretty hyped guy coming into it, but didn't get a whole lot of time for the Wildcats this year. The 7-foot, 200-pounder needs to put on some weight there in the offseason, but 7-footer, he can really step into that role. Tommy Lloyd does very well with the international players. He's very good at developing them. We saw that over the 2 or 3 years that he's been there. Visar, the Estonian, should be able to step into some bigger minutes and really kind of become a DFS option and somebody who's going to play bigger minutes. I definitely like what he brings to the table. And he's somebody that I'm going to be watching on their off season and I haven't checked to see if they're going on a foreign trip yet. There is a list of games out, or trips, I should say, by Jeff Goodman. I'll still have to check that out and see. But I'm very curious to see what he looks like during preseason games. They also get the other center. I'm going to butcher this name. Mutias Krivas, another over 7-footer from Lithuania, 7'2" to be exact. So, getting him, that's a pretty huge get. Tommy Lloyd has already, like I said, proven he's capable of developing big men who maybe aren't the most prolific, scorers, rebounders, that coordinated. Take, for example, the first season for Tommy Lloyd with Christian Koloko. Koloko, under Sean Miller was decent, right? Had really strong rebounding numbers, but he was nowhere near the level that he played in his one season for Tommy Lloyd. And in that one season, it got him drafted, right? He made it to the NBA, I should say. And the development that he showed with Omar Ballo this past season, Ballo, who was on Gonzaga, did okay there when he got minutes, but he really wasn't developed. He follows Lloyd to Arizona, sits for a year behind Koloko, and then what do you know? He becomes a big time weapon for us in DFS and overall an important part to the team. In the non-con games, Ballo was, my God, he right away, turned a corner. Obviously, playing Nicholls State, Utah Tech, teams like that are like, okay, he's putting up these gargantuan numbers, 18-12. He had a 30-13 game against Creighton. Like, that was just like smack my face, like, whoa, Omar Ballo. So I'm obviously a believer in what Lloyd can do with this crowd, with these guys. I think Ballo's in for a huge season. I think Visar could be nice. They have a lot of size to work with. Ballo, Visar, and Krivas, all over 7 feet tall. They're going to be able to do some things. The main thing to worry about here for Arizona is the fact that the guard play could be a little bit suspect. They're obviously looking for guards. They did add the youngster Jaden Bradley from Alabama. I do like that quite a bit, and they do add a 4-star by the name of KJ Lewis. Now, Jaden Bradley, he started a bunch for Alabama. He went through his ups and downs. There were games where he looked really dialed in, but obviously as a freshman in the SEC, you're going to go through that. Brandon Miller, another level NBA guy. Jaden Bradley, he's one of those players, and that's okay. He's one of those players. It's a little raw. Sometimes when you make that step from high school to college, the game's fast. You're a little bit out of sorts. It takes you time. And then year 2, you figure it out. He's going to be able to go into a situation here where Arizona doesn't have a lot of guards. He's going to be nurtured. He's going to be able to play a lot. He's going to be able to play through mistakes. He wasn't enabled while at Bama to play through mistakes. Bama had a roster stable, if you will, of guards. And if Bradley wasn't, equipped to handle the big minutes or he wasn't playing well, they yanked him early, and eventually he stopped starting. And you saw Burnett, you saw some of these other guys getting those minutes. Bradley was a non-factor there at the end of the season. So him and Boswell together will be able to play, develop, and I like this backcourt more. Don't shoot me, Arizona fans, but I liked the backcourt more than I did the Kriisa-Ramey backcourt. I was not a big Kerr Kriisa fan. His first season under Miller, I thought Kriisa was nice. He comes off the bench trying to shoot threes, and he was like 3K, right? Like I had a minor thing for him his first year. But, man, I really fell out of love with him quickly. Don't like his game. Not that interested in him. I like what Bradley and Boswell bring to the table, and those are the two that I'm going to be most focused on here. So Arizona still work to be done, absolutely, but they definitely, are in the right direction. Having this huge front court that is going to be able to do massive damage. It's a really nice looking thing for Arizona overall, and they're going to be in a Pac-12 where they'll be able to take. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that they're going to be competitive, but at the end of the day, they definitely need to show me some more. All right, moving on, we'll go to the Arizona State Sun Devils, who have had a massive roster change. The amount of turnover here is quite alarming. They lose both Cambridge boys. My man Desmond, his exhausted college eligibility. Devin Cambridge is gone. DJ Horn gone. Warren Washington gone. Luther Muhammad, Austin Nunez, Duke Brennan, and Enoch Bokwai all exiting stage left. Also would imagine the Bagley experiment he looked so good his first year, but he never really got it going after that. I also am not sure where we stand with Frankie Collins at the moment. I think the main consensus is that, they'll get one of those two back, but we'll see how it shakes out. But there is a lot to replace here, a lot of the offense, obviously. Devin Cambridge is heading to Oregon, who we'll talk about in a second. Duke Brennan, who showed some promise as a center, he's in the portal, hence to Grand Canyon. So a lot of odd pieces that walk out of here, but they do bring in some fairly good talent as well. And I think they might have the opportunity to be more interesting from a DFS perspective. How often did ASU just disappear and the pieces, they weren't that interesting? DJ Horn, is off to the ACC now. He was nice. Warren Washington had his moments, but for the most part, it was a really unappealing team for a DFS standpoint. Now, the primary players they bring back, Jemiah Neal and Alonzo Gaffney, role players. Neal shows some upside at times, but for the most part, we're really looking at a completely turned over roster and new pieces. They do bring in several 4-stars, Akil Watson, Braylon Green, a JUCO kid by the name of Malachi Davis, who's pretty solid. Kamari Lands from Louisville, who I always liked but didn't really get a good chance to develop there. Louisville was a dumpster fire. Adam Miller, who's been around the block here from Illinois to LSU to now coming to ASU, where I think Miller has an opportunity to kind of fill a higher usage role where he could be more of a, what he's born to be: shoot the ball, handle the rock, drive to the lane. Somebody who I feel will take that step forward. Finally, he gets the ball in his hands often. Kind of reminiscent of a couple of years ago when Alonzo Verge was the primary ball handler on the team. Obviously not the season where it was him and Remy Martin fighting over the ball all the time, but I do think he could turn into a high usage ball dominant type player like one of those two guys and be relatively good for DFS purposes. They do bring in Zane Meeks from San Francisco, Sean Phillips, another LSU transfer. Sean Phillips didn't play a lot for LSU, a lot of upside, a very exciting prospect, somebody that I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do here. I don't have a lot of faith in this Hurley brother like I do UConn's to develop players, but I do like Sean Phillips, and if he's given 20-plus minutes a night, he's going to be an absolutely great prospect to use and somebody that we're going to be talking about a lot. They also bring in Bryson Long, who averaged about 15 points per game at Houston Christian, and Bryant Celebang, who averaged about 12 points at Tulsa. Celebang was a nice piece for Tulsa. He actually had some really good games whenever Tulsa was on the slate, especially early on. That wasn't a team that won very many games. They won 5 games under Eric Conkle. But Celebang and Sam Griffin and Tim Dalger, they had some nice pieces. They just didn't come together. Celebang's numbers were fantastic, though. 26.5% defensive rebounding rate, which was actually number 1 in the American Athletic Conference. That's a big deal. He had the 6th best offensive rebounding rate in the conference, the 7th best field goal percentage, 3rd best free throw rate, 10th best fouls drawn rate, and for a 4, he's a 4, plays small ball 5 sometimes. For a guy that does do damage down low and does drive to the lane a lot and initiates a lot of contact, he really wasn't in foul trouble too often. And that's something that's going to be extremely important in the Pac-12, where you'll find a lot of whistle-happy referees and officials in that conference. Now, we do have the stuff being voted on there to more stabilize the offensive foul charging rules, so we'll see what happens there. But Sullivan's going into a conference where it looks like he can thrive because he's not a fouler. If he was a big-time fouler guy at Tulsa and somebody that I would be like, oh, shoot, 6 fouls per 40, he's in trouble because these Pac-12 refs are going to eat him alive. But that's not the case. So keep an eye out for the man from Montreal, Quebec, Bryant Celebang. I think he's going to be real nice. We'll see how expensive he is early on, but he's definitely one of the primary pieces that I'm looking at from day one for the Sun Devils, whereas Sean Phillips, Adam Miller, those are guys that I think will develop, and Kamari Lands for that matter, and become viable throughout the season as it goes. Now, Bryson Long is kind of interesting. This is one of those deals where it's a low major, high usage guy. How is he going to adjust to the high major level? Played on a Houston Christian team under Ron Cottrell that won 10 games. They had nearly the worst defensive in terms of efficiency in the entire country. That's pretty bad. They did play at a fast pace, so it's pretty exciting there. They really, really struggled at times. But Bryson Long, a really strong three-point shooter, right around 43%, had a high shot rate, a pretty strong true shooting percentage, played a lot of minutes, a very high offensive rating, the highest on the team, drew a decent number of fouls, had a high free throw rate. So he's a good scorer. He's a little bit on the small side, under 6'2", but he's somebody that could be, in that kind of Desmond Cambridge role where maybe beginning all the other guys, there's a pecking order to be established. And then once the conference games start and, offense becomes a little bit harder to come by. Like, remember when Frankie Collins was the guy in the non-con? He disappeared once Pac-12 play started and Desmond kind of stepped in and got buckets. I kind of see Bryson Long potentially being that guy this year for Arizona State. So he's somebody that I'm also fairly interested in. But there's definitely going to be some time and some growing pains here to see how the pecking order shakes out for this entire new roster. And then again, we'll be interested to see if Frankie Collins comes back. I almost want Collins to not come back just so we can see what Miller, Lands, and Long can give us. But if Collins does come back, it does create a little bit of a logjam, and all of them become that a little less appetizing, if you will, a little less appealing, I guess, in terms of, main lineups. Maybe we're running some, GPP stuff, 150 mini max. We're rolling through these ASU guys. But I do suspect it'll be a little bit like last season with them in that there will be less consistency than the other Pac-12 teams. And, one game it might be, oh, shoot, Kamari Lands dropped to 30. Everybody flocks to Lands. This game it was Bryson Long. Everybody flocks to Long. Just don't want to chase these guys on this ASU team because it's going to be a losing move for sure. You're going to want to plan accordingly and just really, when we're targeting these guys, we're going to be looking for leverage. We're going to be looking for individual DVP matchups, and then usage changes, streakiness, stuff like that. This ASU team, man, they're like under Bobby Hurley, they play a certain way, they always have, and it's a revolving door of who's going to be the best DFS option throughout. So keep that in mind when it comes time to use them. Now let's move on here to a team that I wouldn't expect, you probably don't expect me to talk long about them, the California Golden Bears, a team that really hasn't been relevant for seemingly feels like a decade now. They won 3 games this past season under Mark Fox. I like Mark Fox. He's a good guy, did his thing at Nevada for many, many years, goes to Georgia where he's, highly mediocre, doesn't work out. Goes to the Cal Bears because really he can't get any jobs with any winning teams. You get into this pigeonhole spot where it's like, yeah, you're a guy with this experience and you're like just good enough, right? And you get these jobs that just suck. Like the Georgia job for many years just wasn't very good. The Cal job right now was awful. He won 9 games a couple of years ago, 12 the year before last, and then 3 this past season. Like, I'm sorry, Mark Fox, but I don't think the head coaching thing is for you unless you can get on as an assistant in a better program. So this Cal team, like I said, they have not been relevant for quite some time. There were a couple of years there where Cal was pretty fun to watch. You got to go back to almost like 2012 when they had Justin Cobbs, Alan Crabb. Like that was a team that was pretty fun to watch. They had a 20-win season when they had Jordan Matthews, Tyrone Wallace, David Kravish. Like there were some guys when DFS first came around and Draft Street was a thing and FanDuel was like the number one CBB after Draft Street closed out. There were some guys on Cal you could use and really look to create some things. And under Mike Montgomery with Jerome Randall, Jamal Boykin, they were a decent enough team. They made the tournament a couple of years, but it's been a long time. And those Mike Montgomery teams are very far off. However, they do what Stanford couldn't do. Stanford decides they're going to keep, one of the worst coaches in the conference in Jared Haas for one more year because of his great recruiting class. He continues to recruit well. And he's got, some guys coming in the transfer portal. But Cal goes ahead and offers Mark Madsen. Obviously, Madsen had a lot of success during his playing time with Stanford and, a great dancer in his own right when he was on the championship-winning Laker team. But Mark Madsen, man, he's a hot commodity right now. He takes the coaching gig at Utah Valley during the, right before the COVID year. Struggles out the gate. They win like 11 games. Last year, 20-12. This year, 28-9. Has a really fun team. They play at a fast pace. They play really solid defense. He runs his starters into the ground, but he had a great starting five. I mean, the starting five for Utah Valley this year was fantastic. And a lot of those guys have transferred on to higher major teams, by the way, which we'll talk about that, some other time. He is getting the job at Cal, and he's done a fantastic job so far. Let's first, before we get into the newcomers, let's talk about what he loses coming in and who's going to come back. So losing pieces that aren't, typically anyone you're going to worry about. You losing guys from a 3-win team, you're not really going to be like, oh man, we can't lose him. Damn, instead of winning 3, we might win 2. So Lars Tiemann gone. Kwani's gone. He's heading to VCU, by the way. Kwani is, I like him, but I don't know if he can defend at a high enough level to be on a VCU program. We'll see how that works out for him. DeJuan Clayton, who's actually a decent scorer for them. Joel Brown, who seems like he's been in college forever. Sam Alajicki, Marcellus Roberson, Obaya Aniwu, and Jared Hyder, which I did not think Jared Hyder had any more eligibility. Didn't play at all this year. Was a decent scorer during his time at Fresno State, but just didn't work out. Now, it does sound like they'll return Devin Askew, who, of course, got hurt and missed most of the conference season. Of course, started at Kentucky, wasn't great there. Goes to Texas, wasn't great there. Found a decent enough spot on Cal. Did average almost 15 points per game. I expect him back. Grant Newell is coming back, who's a very interesting prospect for Cal. He had moments where he looked like the best player on the court, and then he had other moments where, just a raw prospect who, as a 6'8" freshman and got injured. He just, didn't have the coaching from Fox and development to know how to handle certain situations. He is back. ND Okafor, another younger player that comes back, a 6'9", 240 freshman. So those are two guys that I do look forward to seeing in their second year, especially with Madsen. They do bring back Rand Robinson, a role player, and Monty Bowser. So a couple of role-playing guys there, but mainly the Okafor, Newell, Askew are your main pieces coming back. Now, they do have a couple of 3 stars coming in, Rodney Brown, Devin Curtis, whatever. The main thing here is since Madsen took the job, he hit the portal running, and he has been phenomenal. There has been several teams who have cracked the portal quite well. You got Arkansas, they've contacted 100+. You better win the portal if you contact 100+ players, right? So Arkansas, Kansas has absolutely, I don't think anyone can argue that they are not a portal winner. They've absolutely, just crushed it. I like the job Texas has done despite losing pieces. I think Tennessee is arguably probably a portal winner. I love the job New Mexico's done. I like what Xavier's done. Like, there's some good portal winners there. But Cal, man, the fact that they went from 3 wins to this roster that's capable of winning 20 plus. I mean, if Mark Madsen, or if the Cal Bears win 20 games this next season, I think Mark Madsen's just a shoo-in for the Pac-12 Coach of the Year. So what he's been able to do in the transfer portal is phenomenal. Jalen Cone, who started at Virginia Tech, mainly a shooter there, goes to Northern Arizona, averages 18 points per game last year, big-time scorer, very solid in the Big Sky. He's coming back to play some Power 5 basketball for Cal. Love it. Fardaws Amek, who played at Utah Valley himself. Then he had the injury-riddled season at Texas Tech. Didn't quite work out how everybody thought it would for Texas Tech. Obviously, coaching staff and really weird there. But Amek's coming to Cal. Great addition. Also from Texas Tech, he lands Jalen Tyson. Jalen Tyson, to me, I thought was a perfect fit for Auburn. It sounded like Auburn was in the driver's seat for him, but Mark Madsen did his thing, and NIL came through, and Jalen Tyson's coming with his man Fardaws to Cal. Huge addition. Jalen Tyson could be Pac-12 Player of the Year. I thought Jalen Tyson had a shot to be SEC Player of the Year at Auburn if he would have went, but now you're putting him in a lesser conference and a team where he's going to be able to play 35 plus minutes and really dominate games. I hope he's in the gym every day this summer shooting. Jalen Tyson becomes a consistent shooter. Fuck, man, he's going to be one of the best players in the conference. There's no doubt in my mind. So I love that. Mike Meadows, who is a very strong, piece from Portland, played with, Moses Wood there. And then Keontae Kennedy, who has been around. He was at Memphis last year, averaged about 9-10 points per game. He had some injuries, but he was a solid enough role player for them. And he definitely, was a key piece there at times. And when he was at UTEP, his final season 2 years ago at UTEP, he was actually a really high usage guy. So he's got that capability. So those are the guys that Mark Madsen brings in. Really nice. You throw it in with the returners and Askew, Newell, Okafor, Wren, and Bowser, and you have a team that's capable of competing in this conference. Now, do I think they're going to win the Pac-12? No. Do I think they're going to make a magical tournament run to the Final Four? No. Do I think they might make the tournament as a play-in? Yes. Would I be shocked if they were an 8 seed? No. I think they settle in somewhere between an 8 and 13 seed. I don't know that they have the bench to compete at a high level, but their starters are going to definitely be solid. But with that being said, it's not as if I think Keontae Kennedy and Mike Meadows can handle a grind against a bunch of Power 5, teams. I think both those guys are solid, but I'm not so sure. But if Jalen Tyson takes that stratospheric step that I think he might, then absolutely Cal's capable of winning 20-plus games. And Fardaws, we already know. If Fardaws stays healthy, absolutely. If Fardaws doesn't stay healthy, then we're probably looking at a 15-win season for Cal, 12 wins, something like that. So a lot of that will depend on his health. But a damn fine job by Mark Madsen. And I don't know that they're done yet. I think they still have 1, maybe 2 scholarships open. So we'll see how these pieces come together. But they've done a hell of a job for sure. All right, moving on to Colorado. They lose Lawson Lovering, Neek Clifford, Ethan Wright, Jalen Gabadon, and Quincy Allen. Quincy Allen I was a little bit sad about. I actually really like Quincy Allen. I think he's an interesting player. I thought he had a chance to actually play big minutes for Colorado eventually once De Silva left and everybody else. But he has transferred over to, I believe, to James Madison. Let me double check that. Yeah, James Madison, where I think I think he'll be awesome there. So I'm looking forward to seeing him because that's I am with my sneaks. Tristan Silva, who I expect to be back. KJ Simpson, I expect to be back. Julian Hammond, Javon Ruffin, who I really like. Luke O'Brien and Javon Hadley. It's a pretty strong group. Initially, when the offseason started and I was looking at the moves the Huskies were making, I thought, wow, we could really be the second or third best team in the conference. And I had Colorado behind them. But when I really dig into it and look at what Colorado has coming back, man, I mean, continuity is everything in college basketball sometimes, and having veterans. And we saw the job that Luke O'Brien did to end the season. We saw Javon Ruffin throughout the year, how good he could be. No consistency there. There were injuries for him, but in short spurts, he was really quite good. Julian Hammond showed, signs. So there's a really good group of returners here. They do have, Cody Williams coming in, who's a top 10 recruit, top 70, Asane Diop, a 4-star in Courtney Anderson, and then TCU transfer Eddie Lampkin, who Lampkin will be able to come in there, allow Tristan Da Silva to play more of his natural position at the 4, and Lampkin can play that low post center position and really bang and grab rebound, shot block, absorb contact, while Da Silva does his thing, shoots threes, makes, offense, and really can carry the team at times, because Tristan Da Silva is really, really good. We know that from his time as the Posh Play of the Day. 4 different occasions after the first of the year with Tristan Da Silva as the Posh Play of the Day, he returned us 4.5x at minimum at sub 10% ownership. So, of course, we love Tristan Da Silva. So I'm a fan of what Colorado has in the hole, what they brought in. The Cody Williams get is interesting. There's a bit of a logjam on the wing for Colorado, but Williams likely plays, maybe some 4 at times if Lampkin gets in inevitable foul trouble. Da Silva goes to the 5. Cody Williams can play a little bit of 4 if he has to. But they do have a little bit of a logjam, and that is something that certainly worries me. In on Cody till the end was LSU, so it tells you what kind of talent he had. He was from Gilbert, Arizona, so obviously they were in on him too. But he's somebody that's definitely intriguing. The main thing for him is shooting isn't great. Be very careful with him. I think he's going to have to work on that part of his game. And the nice thing about the continuity and the veterans that Colorado has is they won't need to force him to play big minutes right away. He'll be able to develop, get that shot, and kind of what I see for Cody Williams is this. You guys may remember another of my guys, high usage, right? Super sneak 2 years ago, and then everybody jumps on board and knows him. Then he makes it. Then he goes pro. Of course, I'm talking about Jabari Walker, who was absolutely phenomenal during his freshman season in 2021. We got some really good games out of him. Everybody knew who he was the following year. He absolutely crushed it. And then he goes pro, right? But I could see a trajectory for Cody Williams similar to that of Jabari Walker, where we're going to see him probably have a bench role. He'll play a very high usage bench role where, you'll see him come in and play 12 minutes, but there'll be games where he puts up 25 fantasy points and people won't really register it. And then the following season is where he'll kind of break out. There is a good pedigree in his family. His older brother is Jalen Williams out of the Santa Clara Jalen Williams, who was drafted by the OKC Thunder. So, they've got a family of basketballers there, and that's a kind of a big deal there. So he knows what to expect. But yeah, the main thing for him is working on his shooting, and I think his physicality. So he'll have the opportunity to grow behind some of these other guys on Colorado, which will be nice. But do not be surprised if he has some monstrous games off the bench against lesser tier competition early. It's just a name to kind of have in your back pocket there. Comes out 3K. You need a sneak value. Plug them in, maybe have some good things happen. All right, moving on to the Oregon Ducks. You guys know I hate the Oregon Ducks. I love seeing them struggle. I like how it's been a bit of a puzzle that hasn't been solved by Dana Altman. Dana Altman has been a fantastic coach throughout the course of his career, dominated at Creighton for so many years. He's been at Oregon since, 2010. And just 20 win seasons, they continue to win. The last couple of seasons have been down years for them, but they still won 20 games at minimum. So you got to give it to them. These aren't the Dylan Brooks Oregon teams that won 30 plus games, but they definitely are still competitive for the most part under Altman. But they've got to make some moves here, and they have state-of-the-art facilities. They have, Uncle Phil money. They have crazy amounts of NIL. Like, there's no excuse for them not to be competitive year in and year out. Now, they do lose some really intriguing pieces to the portal. Khalil Ware, losing him, that's a big deal to Indiana. A lot of people expect him to make a giant leap this year. I think he was misused at Oregon. I'm not quite sure why Altman decided to really kind of, interchange him with Nate Biddle instead of figuring out a way to either A, play them together, or B, not play Nate Biddle. And Nate Biddle's good defensively and he can do things, but you got to play Kel Ware. Like, what are you doing? Quincy Guerrier, you gone. Rivaldo Suarez, who I liked, he's gone. Lockwer, Tyrone Williams, who I think is an intriguing prospect in the future, and Ethan Butler. Other player that they lose is, of course, Will Richardson, who is finally out of eligibility. What a weird trajectory for Will Richardson, by the way. He starts off his career as a role player, but a solid one. Then he rises to the level of semi-stud for them, and then completely falls off the face of the earth and totally unusable. And his price on DK was consistently 8K plus, and you saw for the first month of the season people plug him in, but myself, Stills, Mike, we're like, nah, he's just not doing it. We stopped using him, and it took people a solid 2 months, two and a half months to realize like Will Richardson's not playing. Once the industry clicked and made that recognition, he was never owned ever again the rest of the year. But man, there was a lot of dead lineups because of Will Richardson for about a quarter to almost half of the season. It was awesome. I don't know. Will Richardson is gone though, and I gotta say I'm sad about it. I'm sad about it because I wanted to be able to keep fading him. All right. So let's talk a little bit about. Let's see here. Let me pull up their team page. All right, so Tyrone Williams, who I really like, by the way, going to Old Dominion. I just wanted to look at that. That's somebody I want to pay attention to. Rivaldo Suarez, who's nice. He goes to Oklahoma, which is interesting. Gonna get some burn for the Sooners. Kind of shows you just how good he could possibly be. Quincy Guerrier, who feels like he should be out of eligibility. I mean, shoot, he was at Syracuse at 2017. I mean, my God, really good at Syracuse, not so good at Oregon. He's going to finish his career at Illinois, so we'll see what happens there. Lockwer headed to the Grand Canyon University. They've grabbed a couple of cast-offs. That's kind of what Bryce Drew and the boys do anyway, so not too surprising with that one. And then who else they losing? Ethan Butler, who was a freshman who was he's still in the portal, somebody that was expected to get burned, didn't happen. And then, like I said, Kel Ware going to Indiana. Who they're bringing in is not necessarily super intriguing. Mookie Cook is the number 20 in the ESPN Top 100, and Kwame Evans is number 13, as well as Jackson Shelstad, number 35. So they've got some guys coming in here, highly rated recruits that are going to be forced into probable big minutes right away with the pieces they've lost. And it makes sense. Mookie Cook actually reneged on his commitment, was going to go elsewhere, but decided to stay with Oregon, which I know I would have preferred to see him leave. I think he's going to be really good. Out of those three, I think Cook's going to be really, really good. They bring in Georgia, high usage, never met a shot he didn't like, Cario Oquendo. So we'll see what that fits in there with the young roster. And then Devin Cambridge from Arizona State, Desmond's brother, who a lot of people thought he'd go back to Auburn. He didn't. I wasn't really too sure. He's okay. He's not great, but he's a role player. As long as he plays as that role and they don't try to make him do too much, then he's fine. He's a little bit limited with what he's capable of doing, but he's fine on this roster because you look at the returners and Fali Dante, who's fantastic big, like Dante a lot. Tremaine Cuisinart, who's a guy who's usually always chalk, another one that I like to fade, dating back to his South Carolina days. Keyshawn Bartholomew, who had transferred here from Colorado a year ago, he's quite productive. Brennan Rigsby, who's fine, and Nate Biddle, who's returning. And really, honestly, the reason Cal Ware is gone, I think, is Nate Biddle, and it's going to look silly when Cal Ware goes nuts for Indiana. But there's some solid pieces here for this Oregon team. They definitely, continuity-wise, are probably going to be slightly better, even though they have some pieces coming in that are new that are going to be forced to play big minutes. But I do like overall how they look. Their guard play to me is a little bit shaky, I think, because Jackson Shellstat's going to come in there and probably run the point. You have Bartholomew, who I think is capable, but where does Cario Oquendo fit into this? Like, Oquendo's gonna get shots. He's going to disrupt the offense though, like he did in Georgia. Like, when the ball comes to him, he's looking to score, and when he's hot, you're feeling great about it. But when he has those games where he's 3 for 18, he just disrupts the flow of the game. And I'm wondering what the tolerance, the patience of Dana Altman will be for a player like Cario Oquendo, who really just, to me, doesn't fit in this Oregon lineup at all, especially with the youngsters coming in and the way that I think Oregon wants to run, which is play through their wings and their bigs, which Biddle and Dante are going to, I think, get a lot of the offense. And then you might see some Mookie Cook, small ball 4 kind of thing. So I really don't know where Oquendo fits in this roster. And I could see Oquendo losing minutes to Devin Cambridge right away, because Devin Cambridge won't need shots to be effective. Devin can get it done on the offense or the defensive end. He can rebound. He can, defend a little bit. Whereas Cario, his main value to a team is his ability to shoot, his ability to score. And if he's not shooting well, he can't be on the floor. I mean, so we'll see what happens with Cario, but that's one player that I'm probably going to be overly critical of throughout the season. Oregon State Beavers. This roster is bad. There are losers of the portal, such as Michigan. Seton Hall they have a great coaching staff, but they don't have any NIL money. So they're losing the portal badly. And then you have Oregon State with Wayne Tinkle. Wayne Tinkle turns a absolute majestic run. I mean, Tinkle was on the morphine drip, right? Like, he was on the verge of losing his job after COVID, and he goes on the most improbable tournament run throughout the Pac-12 tournament, winning it, back in, 2021-ish. And then the run through the tournament as a 12 seed, where they beat Tennessee, they beat Oklahoma State, they beat that Loyola Chicago team that everybody liked. And then they almost beat a Houston team. They pushed that Houston team and only lost by 6. And that's a team with Quentin Grimes, Justin Gorham, Dejan Giroux, right? Fabian White. Like, my God, that Oregon State team, the most improbable run ever. The way Ethan Thompson played was phenomenal. The way Warith Alatishe played was phenomenal. Jared Lucas, Zach Reichel, Mo Kalu, like, that roster had no business winning 3 games in the tournament, but that got Wayne Tinkle a huge extension. And what has he done in the 2 years since that extension? Well, he won 3 games. The very next year, he went 3-28. They didn't win a game that following season after December 30th. So 3 straight months of losing every game. And it's not as if they didn't have players. They had, Jared Lucas back again, Mo Kalu, Deshaun Davis, who I really liked, but didn't choose the Huskies. Don't like him that much anymore. And Glenn Taylor, a young Glenn Taylor. And then this past season, they go at it and they win 11 games, slightly improved, but still really awful basketball the way they're being played. And their one, legitimate, exciting prospect, their scorer was Jared Lucas. They lost him 2 years ago, of course, to Nevada. But Glenn Taylor was the guy that looked like, he could actually play. Glenn Taylor could be the guy to really have a breakout season. He averaged 12 points per game. Like, this will be his 3rd season. He could be an 18-point per game scorer in this program. But nope, he's out the door, doesn't want to play for this abomination of a program, decides he will be headed to St. John's. Love it for Glenn Taylor. Love it. Absolutely love it. They also lose Nick Crass, no big deal, and Demetrius Reunion. Demetrius Reune is an interesting player. He's a guy that I feel like could have actually really been good. And he showed flashes of being a quality, kind of hybrid big. But there was a log jam of forwards on Oregon State, none of them great. And I think he was tired of waiting for quote unquote his turn, and decided that this program no longer for him. So he's heading out. This is a team that has had many bigs throughout. Reunion was at San Fran for a while. We'll see. I think he might be out of eligibility now that I think about it. I can't remember if he has 1 year or he's out of eligibility, but gone either way. Returning, they do have continuity with their returners. Jordan Pope, who next to Glenn Taylor was the best scorer. Dexter Akano, Tyler Bilodeau, who was a Mr. Washington basketball player. Michael Rataj, Rodrigo Andela. Andela, I'm surprised has eligibility left. Seems like he's been around for a while since his JUCO days. Joel Mario, who has just never worked out. Justin Rochelin, Christian Wright, and Casey Ubekwe. Now, on that roster, Casey Ubekwe and I think I would say probably Tyler Bilodeau are the most intriguing prospects. Jordan Pope and Dexter Akano are those guys. Like, I think, they'll be the decent floor players where I don't think we'll see them break slates. But if you're on a smaller slate or you got to use somebody from Oregon State because they're all cheap, those are guys who can give you like that 3x number, right? But they're never going to go 5x plus. Whereas Bilodeau and Ubekwe come in at like 3.5, 3.2 near min price. Yeah, there's a chance they give you 1 point. But if it's a game they're not fouling and they're grabbing boards, they're contributing, they could actually really pay that number off and potentially hit like a 7x number. So it's not a team I'm going to be looking to target from very often. They have, like I said, at least continuity, but there's like nothing doing. They haven't made any portal additions. They have an unranked kid coming in by the name of Gavin Morris. I don't even know if he's going to play at all, but things are dire. They are very, very dire for Oregon State. They're beyond losers. You probably can't even call them a loser in the portal because the pieces they lost out. I mean, Glenn Taylor's important, yes, but they're a do not register on the scale. Where Seton Hall is a big time loser in the portal because they lost everyone. Oregon State just does not register. So moving on, we have the Stanford Cardinal who decides to keep Jared Haas one more time because he continues to bring in these recruits, man, and they did not. I get why Stanford kept him, and this is why they've kept him the last 2 or 3 years because he keeps on getting recruits that are highly rated and potentially program changers. And if they get rid of Haas, then they're going to lose those guys. So I get why they're doing it, but at some point you have to say like, yeah, he keeps recruiting well, but he's not winning games. And this is what my Huskies did to my man Lorenzo Romar. Like, I would love to have Romar because he recruited at a high level and he actually did win games, but it was like, it was like 1 year we're NIT, the next year we're a first round loss, then a first round loss, then a second round loss. But you know what? We're in the postseason. We're winning enough games. We got exciting players on the team. Like, we should have just kept Lorenzo Romar because with Hopkins, he won with Romar's players. Now you see what Hopkins does. Nobody does less with more than Mike Hopkins except Jared Haas. So we'll see if he sticks around. If Stanford doesn't make the postseason, I don't even know like if they're going to say you got to make the big dance or you're gone. It might just be like, okay, you made the NIT and you won a couple of games, we'll keep you. But if they don't make the postseason, I just don't know how you keep them. I don't know how you keep them. Harrison Ingram is gone. That's a fat loss heading over to a new program, as it were. Talking about a player that was capable of really turning it on, putting up and played within himself. He didn't need to score to produce. I really liked, didn't really like him early on in his second year, third year. He really started to become a much better player. But now he's off to North Carolina. So we'll see what happens there. But I did like the way Ingram was trending there. They also lose Michael O'Connell. Not a huge loss, but definitely somebody who at least capable of running the offense. He's headed to NC State, which is interesting. Not a big-time scorer, but somebody who, like I said, can run the offense. Neil Begovic is, I believe, headed to Duke to be their 4.5 GPA team. Won't play, but he's got the smarts. And then Issa Silva is the other player they'll be losing to the portal there that actually got minutes. Silva, he's headed to Long Beach State. So obviously Ingram, big loss. The rest of them, not so much. The returners are important. Spencer Jones, who over 14 points a game, key scorer. Michael Jones, who had his moments early on. He kind of fooled people. To me, it was a little bit on the obvious side that he wasn't going to be some 20-point per game scorer. The first game of the season for Stanford was against Pacific. And in that game, Michael Jones, he had a bunch of threes. He got to the foul line 12 times, had over 30 points. People were talking, oh my God, Michael Jones is so good. He's come over from Davidson. He's going to be this big star. And it's well, he's not that guy. I mean, he's a 3-point shooter. He's going to get his shots, but he's not going to be scoring 30 plus. And wouldn't you know it, that really didn't happen. So he's much better as a role player. I think he'll be fine in that role with the roster they have coming in. Maxime Reynaud is an interesting big. He showed his flashes. I really like his capabilities of being a very good low post scorer, somebody that can rebound a little bit, but somebody that can score in the double digits and be like a 20, 25 fantasy point per minute guy. Fantasy point per game guy. Brendan Angel returns, who I always like. He's kind of a what I like to call a high-end, borderline elite role player, capable of breaking the slate randomly, but putting up a good number. It took a while for Haas to realize he needed to play him a lot, but he finally did, and he produced. Max Morrell and James Keefe, the other pieces, just role-playing guys, but they bring in 3 players that are going to contribute right away and make Stanford somewhat relevant. Providence transfer Jared Bynum, all about Jared Bynum. Has those games where he goes into high usage scoring mode where he can just get to the basket at will. Has tendency to disappear at times, so that's a little alarming, but I think in the Pac-12 he can play it really well. So Jared Bynum, definitely a guy I like. And then the 2 big name recruits, Cannon Carlisle, number 43, and Andrei Stojakovic, number 21. And in case you're wondering, or that name Stojakovic sounds familiar to you, he is indeed the son of Peja, legendary shooter Peja Stojakovic, the Serbian assassin, as it were. It's crazy because we grew up watching Peja. He's 45 now, has a kid coming up and going, we're going to be using his kid in CBB DFS next year for Stanford. His kid, Andrej, is a fantastic scorer at the high school level. He's going to come in and just he's going to wreak havoc. I'm pretty confident in him. Carlisle, I'm not as confident in. I think he will be good eventually, but some of those youngsters on Stanford in the mold of Carlisle and athletic like that take a little bit of time. And the development by Haas, he hasn't shown himself to be a great developer. Let's put it that way. He gets the talent, but he never really develops it. With Stojakovic, he's ready to play right away. He's going to be a big-time scorer. They're going to be able to scheme to get in the ball. His development isn't as important because of his ability to score the rock, whereas Carlisle will need time, right? And the fact is he picked Stanford over Texas. He picked them over UCLA, and he picked them over Oregon. That was his Final Four. God, I would have loved him at Texas, though. Really good wing. Scored at all 3 levels. There's no doubt about it. He's just like Peja. If you haven't seen him play before, get a chance to go on YouTube or watch some clips. Just like Peja. Pull up threes, can create his own shot a little bit, run off the screen, quick trigger, step backs. He really is Peja, this generation Peja, and I think he's going to be really fun. I'm looking forward to him at the collegiate level, and I don't know that we'll have him that many years, so we got to enjoy him while we have. And I'm not saying he's going to be like some mega superstar Wooden Award winner. I think he's going to be really good. And he's got the Peja stroke, man. He's got that quick trigger on his shot. Like, he's going to be able to pull up from anywhere. And he's going to be one of those guys who I hope his name doesn't get him priced at like $9K in November, because he won't be playable at that price. But if he comes in at $6K, maybe $7K, like, I'll be in on him. I'll be in on him because he's really good, and he's going to be a force, especially in a conference like the Pac-12 where, let's be honest, it's a little weaker. All right. So Stanford, definitely intriguing. UCLA. Now the Bruins are in a lot of damn trouble because Jaime Jaquez is definitely done. Jalen Clark is definitely done. David Singleton, definitely done. Ebrimo Kanka to the portal. Mac Etienne to the portal. Adam Bona is injured still. He's been injured for the half the year. He's at the combine, but did elect to sit out the 5-on-5 portion of the combine because he's still injured. He's doing, drills and all that stuff, measurables. So we'll see what happens. I do think ultimately he comes back to the Bruins, and if he does, he's going to be a big-time player. But it's probably truly 50-50 right now. I think not Jalen Clark. I think Tiger Campbell is likely done. He's been doing just enough at Portsmouth and the combine, and I just don't think we're going to see Tiger Campbell back. As much as I'd like to see Tiger Campbell back, I don't think we see him back. Now, we want Amari Bailey to come back, because if Amari Bailey comes back, his sophomore season will be as good as Johnny Juzang, if not better. He's going to be a big-time bucket getter. He's going to work on his shooting. He's going to be able to do some things. But the problem is Amari looks so good in this, various drills and scrimmages and stuff that we're probably not getting him back either. So potentially the Bruins are losing every member of their starting five and their top, two bench guys. That's not good. That would leave the returners to be Will McClendon, who just has never worked out. Will McClendon has, by now, Will McClendon should be something. There should be a pulse. There should be an ability to score, defend, rebound, anything, Will McClendon. But when he got a little bit of, this is a top 100 recruit. This guy from a couple of years ago, he was a top 100 recruit. But the little bit of minutes, like you saw him in games where they were forced to use him, he looked terrified. He looked absolutely overwhelmed. The speed of the game, still too much for him. He's been in class of 2021. Like, we're coming into year 3 on McClendon. Like, that's really not good. So I don't know what's going to happen there, but he's not a guy that you can rely on. Kenneth Nweba, pretty raw, had his moments. He would be getting some more minutes without Bona. And then Dylan Andrews, who I think Dylan Andrews can make that next step and play fairly well. He did show in small spurts that he could play, he could defend and be in Cronin's system and succeed. He was only a freshman. So somebody who in year 2 can definitely take that next step. Right around 32% 3-point shooter, and he did some things. He definitely did some things, and I like Dylan Andrews, somebody who will get a lot of playing time potentially if they're going to lose all these guys. And then they bring in Lazar Stefanovic, an in-conference transfer from Utah. Stefanovic randomly broke the slate once last year, put up a huge number. Typically a role player, but he's a little bit on the higher end in that regard. He had a much better season for Utah, and somebody that actually became relatively dependable. He got priced out in DFS rather quickly after his blow-up game, but he's a dependable player that they'll be able to utilize quite a bit. And then it's high school kids, Sebastian Mack, Devin Williams, and Brandon Williams. 3 top 100 guys, but they're 60 to 70 range recruits, and that's kind of where Cronin lives. That's the McClendon range. So stands to reason that, those guys might not be ready for big minutes, and but then again, they might have to. They may not have a choice. Mac for sure is going to have to play a lot, and it's kind of alarming about how good UCLA's been for so long here this past decade, that they're potentially going to be really, really bad. Now, under Cronin, they'll always defend, but it's just a talent disparity suddenly. But like I said, they're looking at a group here Brandon Williams, Davin Williams, like those guys are going to have to play a lot. Lazar Stefanovic is going to have to play a lot. So DFS wise, we will have a situation where we'll have guys that we can use because we know they're going to play a lot, but there's going to be some 35 minutes, 8 fantasy point performances from some of these guys here. Mainly want to look into Dylan Andrews. He's the guy to really check into and see what happens. But for the most part, this roster is not great at the moment. Now, if they get guys back, then they will be great. And I like Sebastian Mack, though. I think Sebastian Mack is somebody who could play a lot, depending on the situation with the other guards. So we'll keep track of that, and he may be forced from day one to play 35, 40 minutes per game. And if that's the case, then we love him and we're all in. But there's a lot to be determined. We'll see who comes back. And after the combine, we'll have a much better idea what's going to happen with the Bruins. They could potentially be as good as the second or third conference. They could swing 7th, 8th, 9th, depending on how things shake out. Still work to be done in the portal as well. All right. Moving on to the USC Trojans. The Trojans, they lose Drew Peterson, Reese Dixon-Waters, Trey White, Malik Thomas, and Yaroslav Niagu. Trey White, there's a lot of hype surrounding Trey White, like a ridiculous amount. And I like Trey White. I think he's good. I think he's potentially going to be really good, obviously. But some of the hype on him, we watched him play. He's raw. At times, he looks like the best player on the court. There's a lot of development to go there. I think he will take the offseason seriously and really step into a role with Louisville where he's going to be really, really good for them. But we need to slow down the hype train on him a little bit. But still, a big loss. I think potentially or arguably the loss of Reese Dixon-Waters is going to hurt them more. He was, a role player, but a role player capable of taking over games at times when needed. He's headed to San Diego State, and I think he'll actually do really so. Interested in seeing him there. But those are the losses. The returners for them, Boogie Ellis, that's huge. Kobe Johnson, who's a really good defender. Vincent Uchukwu, who, missed a lot of time this season. I really like him in year 2. I think Vincent could be very good. I think people have maybe forgotten about him a bit, so we might get him at a cheap or a low rostership, number early on. Josh Morgan returns, so I'm not that high on. And Kajani Wright, another, highly ranked recruit coming into that class with Vincent Uchukwu. So 2 guys who have development stuff to work on this summer, but potentially could come back and be really, really good. So a solid group of returners. Despite losing Peterson, Waters, and White, USC with that group right there, they're competitive. And then you turn around and you look at what they're bringing in, and it's like, okay, wow, the Trojans team, they're going to be good. They're going to be a lot of hype, but they're going to be good. Isaiah Collier, the number 1 player in the class, going to USC. Arrington Page, number 40th player in the class. And then Bronny James. Yes, that's right. LeBron James is pride and joy, the 19th best recruit in the ESPN 100, coming to USC. And they also bring in a transfer, another in-conference transfer. These in-conference transfers, man, just so many. DJ Rodman from Washington State. Rodman, of course, a son of another, player, Dennis Rodman, and great rebounder for his time at Wazoo, a solid enough 3-point shooter, and a good, looking at a good role for USC where he's going to play a decent chunk as a role player on the wing. This USC team, they're going to be hyped to the moon. I think we might see coverage on them because of the fact, obviously you're looking at, Collier, and already the number 1 player is going to get a lot of talk. But then you bring in a player of Bronny James' stature with his dad and everything. And you're talking about nonstop coverage. It's me one DFS wise, how many people are going to naturally, casual players especially come in and see, oh my God, LeBron James, his son's playing, like I got to click him in. Bronny's going to be good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not sure how DFS is going to work out for him just yet because Collier's the real deal. And also you got a guy in Boogie Ellis who averaged almost 20 points per game. And you have the maturation and development upcoming of Kajani Wright and Vincent Uchukwu. So it's not as if Collier and Bronny and Page are just going to come in here and get all the usage and all score 20 points per game. That's not happening. Boogie's still going to get his. Kobe's going to get his. Vincent's going to have to get the ball. Like, there's some weapons here. The nice thing is, even though it's a situation where there's some ball dominant players potentially, they're not that deep. We're really looking at a probably 8-man rotation. I don't know that Sellers or Ornery are going to get many minutes, and I'm not even sure that Arrington Page would be a guy that steps into a huge role. So you're looking really, Boogie Ellis, Kobe Johnson, Vincent Uchukwu, Collier, Rodman, and James, and then probably Kajani Wright, and they'll still play Joshua Morgan. So a 7-8-man rotation. That's going to be nice for DFS purposes, no matter how you look at it, and there'll be enough to go around for those guys to all produce. Now, it's price dependent. If Boogie Ellis starts the season at 9K, which, he started getting there at one point, I'm off. I'm not going to be using him at that price. I want to see how he reels in his scoring and maybe becomes more of an assist guy with Collier on the team and Bronny James, but still going to get his. If he comes into it at like 7K, then I'd definitely be hitting him up hard. If they drop the ball and price him at 6K, then it's an all-in situation kind of thing. But we'll see how the pecking order absolutely established and drops down here. But I think what's going to happen is people are going to be, goo goo gaga for Bronny and Collier, plug them in no matter what their prices are. And we're going to be able to get some nice leverage with guys like Ellis, Kobe, Uchukwu at way lower rostership. And it might be a bit of an overpay at times for those guys, but we could potentially get paid off very, very hard, depending on how that shakes out. But that's the type of moves we make during the conference season. In the non-con, you can expect to see Bronny and Collier put up big numbers because they're going to want to develop those guys and let them get a lot of usage. We'll see on this summer when they have their exhibition games what that looks like. But it's definitely a team that looks really exciting for DFS purposes and in real life as well. And I expect this Trojans team to be a tournament team with their roster. Don't sleep on Boogie Ellis. I think a lot of people are going to be forgetting about Boogie Ellis, and that would be a major, major mistake. All right, moving on to the use of Utah. They do lose Lazar Stefanovic, we mentioned already, to UCLA. Marco Anthony, Mike Saunders, Boston Holt, and Jackson Brenchley. Holt, Saunders, and Brenchley were mostly role players. Stefanovic a key piece, and Marco Anthony also a fairly big key piece, somebody who could put up double-doubles kind of quietly at times, but a really high-end rebounder that got overlooked quite a bit. Mike Saunders, he's a guy that is off to McNeese State during the mid-major show-out. That McNeese State team had some P5 transfers, not exciting. I'm not going to react to that now, but he's off to McNeese. I like that for him. Brenchley, doesn't really matter too much about him being gone. Same with Boston. They're one of those guys where we're really key pieces to the puzzle by any means. I think that we're looking at a roster for the most part that is definitely lower end for a P5. However, being in the Pac-12, they're probably more like a mid-tier team as opposed to lower end. So I like a couple of the options on this team. Get this to load here. All right, the returners. Let's start there. Raleigh Worcester, who I definitely like. Ben Carlson, Brandon Carlson, who I do think is 50-50 right now, so we'll see. Gabe Madsen, and Wilkins Exacte Jr. So, a good portion of the roster. Marco and Lazar Stefanovic both, combined for about 20 points per game. So that's a decent chunk of scoring, but they can definitely replace that. And they've hit the portal. They didn't really recruit anyone. They've got a JUCO kid coming in by the name of Hunter Erickson. They do step into the conference for 2 transfers. They get Washington's Cole Bajema, 3-point shooter, 3-and-D type of guy. I like Cole. I wish him well there. I think he'll do fine there. Lawson Lovering from Colorado, kind of a does the dirty work for a team, that type of player. I think he'll do well for Utah as he won't have to score. And then Davon Smith from Georgia Tech. Davon Smith is a guy I think DFS players, myself included, really like. Always want him to, do well. He's a guy that, everybody's always trying to pick as like that game right before he blows up. Things didn't quite work out for him in Georgia Tech. They're obviously playing for a coach that is terrible in Josh Pastner. Can really wear on you. But Davon Smith, before his injuries, he was really showing big-time flashes, playing big minutes, and looking like the guy that we thought he could be, which he showed a little bit at Mississippi State during his freshman year. So heading to Utah, he looks like a guy that can definitely contribute immediately and look really, really good. So I think he's probably the most intriguing player on this Utah team from a fantasy perspective. And obviously, if Brandon Carlson comes back, he's their best player. And I think Raleigh Worcester without Marco Anthony can really take that next step as well. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to get something from Wilkins, Exacte, or something from Ben Carlson. Those two guys can't just sleepwalk through the season and then contribute a little bit. They're going to have to contribute a lot of it, or Utah's going to have to go out there and get some more players. All right, moving on here. We're cruising right along. We have my Washington Huskies, the moment we've been waiting for. They lost a ton. Keon Menafield at the end of the year, everybody loves Keon Menafield, volume scorer, high usage guy. Said at the end of the year that he would be back, but obviously reneged on that and decided to leave us for the Hogs, the Razorbacks. But that's okay. I said to myself, as long as Corin Johnson came back, the Huskies would be okay. So Menafield gone. Cole Badgerma, we just talked about, goes to Utah. Noah Williams decides to leave. He played for the Cougars and the Huskies. The writing was on the wall for him. Missed time, missed games. Jamal Bay, finally out of eligibility. I believe he may have one left if he wants it, but I'm pretty sure not. Tyler Linhard hits the portal. Jackson Grant, Langston Wilson, Kyle Littenden, and PJ Fuller. So a ton of players, right? Automatically off top, and a couple of very important pieces in that regard, 8 or 9 guys just gone. But the important pieces that we needed to return. Corin Johnson, who I still stand by it, is going to be a program all-timer. If Corin Johnson stays for all 4 years, a program all-timer. And I think there's a good chance he might. Love Corin's game. He showed the ability to score, to hit threes. He could run the offense. He can defend. That's the thing that Corin started to force his way onto the court. Hopkins played him a little bit. Offensively, he wasn't quite there yet. He's young, he's raw. But his defense was so good that he forced Hopkins' hand. And towards the end of the last month or two, Corin was on the floor playing big minutes, and he had to be. We bring back Frank Kepnong, who was really good before he got hurt. I like Kepnong a lot. Shot blocker, rim protector, good rebounder, low post scorer. Once he went down, Braxton Mia filled that role admirably, having those two guys to kind of anchor the middle and protect the rim. Love it. And then getting Keon Brooks back. Average 18 points per game. High usage guy. When we needed a bucket, we could go to him. Love the fact that he's coming back. Automatic preseason, all Pac-12 first teamer. Probably could fight for Pac-12 player of the year as well, especially if the Huskies, make the postseason. So those are the 4 pieces we bring back. All the rest of the roster gone. And I'm perfectly happy with it, because we already did well on the recruiting trail. Christian King, who's a local kid to Seattle, getting him, that's going to automatically drive some local traffic. It's going to, we've missed out a couple of years on some local talent, and it's been a real UConn stole a guy from our backyard, right? We talked about it during the Big E show with Jalen Stewart. But getting Christian King is big, and especially if King gets minutes early or contributes at all, it will start to tell the local kids, like, hey, I can go there, I can get minutes, and especially if we turn this program around, start winning games, we got to keep these kids in state. So Christian King staying in state is great. Number 51 in the ESPN Top 100, Wesley Yates, went right into Texas's backyard and took Wesley Yates right out of there. Big-time performer. He's going to be fantastic. He would have had to play big minutes immediately if Keon Brooks went away, but he didn't, so now he can kind of – sorry, fridge is freaking out. He can kind of, do his thing, learn behind them, play minutes, develop early on, and really, once they need him, they can get him in there and play quite well. And I think he's good enough. If we get somebody in foul trouble or somebody gets hurt, he can step in and play big minutes. I mean, Yates had, quite a few players or quite a few teams, I should say, looking at him. He had offers from Auburn. He had an offer from Gonzaga. He had an offer from Baylor, LSU. Like, Wesley Yates had offers from a ton of way better programs than my Huskies, but we got him because he liked the opportunity, he liked the area, and he obviously liked the NIL potential that he would have here. So I'm really excited about Wesley Yates, and to me, Wesley Yates and Corin Johnson, the future of the program. I think both are going to be really stellar players. Now, in the transfer portal, we do a little bit of work here. Anthony Holland from Fresno State, who's going to be a solid defender, backup, guard, can initiate some offense. Like Anthony Holland a lot in that bench role, kind of taking the Jamal Bay or the, PJ Fuller role. I think he can do well there. They do bring in Moses Wood, who averaged almost 16 points per game at Portland, 3-and-D guy, a stretch 4. And then getting a point guard to tie it all together was important. We keep the Kentucky to Washington pipeline going, bring in Severe Wheeler, dealt with a ton of injuries during this past season, but we know how good of a passer Wheeler is. He doesn't need to score to affect the game. Really high assist rate, one of the best passers in all of college basketball when healthy. But we also saw at times when Kentucky struggled to score, Wheeler showed a different side of himself that we really hadn't seen since his Georgia days. And he was able to get some buckets, kind of scoring at will, driving to the basket, hitting some key shots. And it was a whole nother side of Severe Wheeler that we were not typically accustomed to seeing, like we have, his early time at Georgia maybe, but definitely not during his Kentucky days. Ended up missing all of February and all of March, but the last couple of games before that, he really showed out and had some nice, strong performances. Took 14 shots against Alabama in one game in January, scored 15 against them. He had 11 point, 6 rebound, 9 assist game, I believe it was, against LSU. That was one of his better performances of the season. He scored 16 against Michigan State, showed an ability to actually be able to score and get to the foul line and do it well. Not a big three-point shooter by any stretch of the imagination typically. However, he did shoot 36% on 41 attempts last year in just 21 games, and his assist rate was a typical high of 35%, which was top 25 in the country. So love Severe Wheeler being on the Huskies to tie this group together. We're looking at a probable starting 5 of Severe Wheeler, Keon Brooks, I would say Kepnong with Mia off the bench, Moses Wood, that's the group. Corin Johnson, Severe Wheeler, Keon Brooks, Kepnong, and Moses Wood. Like, if we get a starting 5 of that, I'm happy. You bring Holland and Mia and Yates off the bench with Christian King, and that's a pretty good roster. That's a roster that can compete, easily a top 5 roster in the Pac-12. And I think this is a roster that should make the postseason. I'm not going to sit here and say, we're going to the big dance, but it's got to be an NIT or bust. It can't even be like a CBI, CIT type of thing. I would have loved to have taken the CBI this year. It's got to be NIT or bust, and I know that's like NIT, but trust me, this Washington program, we've been so good for so many years, but the Brandon Roy years seem so far away. The Isaiah Thomas years seem so far away. Hell, even the first 2 seasons that Hop took over the program with Jalen Noel, those years seem so far away. So I like the fact that we're on the right track. We have 1 to 2 spots open still. They have what's his name, Samuel Uribe, NBA Academy kid, and is taking up a roster spot. But we still have 1 to 2 Scullies left to add a player. And I think, adding a bench piece that can either defend or hit threes is going to be really important. But this is the group we're going to war with. And I think Hopkins has done a fantastic job, and I absolutely love it. And we're looking at a 7-8 man rotation, which we know for DFS and fantasy purposes is money. Stay away from those 10-plus man rotations, the Leonard Hamilton special. My Huskies are going to be doing some big things this year. Book it, mark it down, mark my words. All right, finishing up here, The Washington State Cougars decimated, just decimated. TJ Bamba off to Villanova. By the way, I think TJ Bamba is way overhyped, a little overrated. I know he averaged 16 points per game, but I don't know. I'm not a believer that he's going to do that well at Villanova. He may prove me wrong, and if he does, great, but just not a believer in that one. But I am happy to say that I won't have to see him because he was admittedly, he was a Washington Husky killer. Annoyingly enough, somebody that the Huskies just had on very and somebody that we don't have to worry about seeing anymore. All right, the mass exodus that they've seen, though, definitely going to set them back a little bit. And they had some good seasons there for a while, right? Were competitive, but they're definitely going to be taking a step back with what they've lost and compared to what they have coming in. We already mentioned that DJ Rodman transferred to USC, so that's another pretty key piece to the puzzle that's gone. Deshaun Jackson, who ended up redshirt, I think that was a medical redshirt for him. The year prior, he was actually pretty good fantasy. They started him for some games. He came off the bench, but he was a pretty high end rebounder. Him and Effie Abigidi kind of traded spots and positions there in playing time for their first year together before Abigidi went I believe it was the G League route, and Jackson ended up redshirting there. But he is a solid player, almost 7 foot. He decides to transfer to Charlotte, which I love for him because Charlotte doesn't have any talent, so he'll get a chance to play. So losing him, that's tough. They also lose the kid that a lot of people are excited about when they got him, Adrien Diong. He hits the portal. He didn't play a lot for the Cougars, but a recruit that definitely was somebody they thought was going to fit into the mold of Effie Abigidi or a Deshaun Jackson and be their next, big and he's a footer, top 50, somebody that people expected to be a guy for them, and it just so he's hit the portal, which I think here's the thing: the Cougars play in a town called Pullman on the east side of the state in Washington. There's nothing there. There's nothing to do except drink. It's a little bit on the hick side. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And their NIL program is certainly not stellar. So that is why they lost so many key pieces. Mo Gay and Justin Powell, both key players that they need to get back. We'll see what happens there. It's a little bit of 50-50 status. I do expect them to get Jade Mullins back, who was a local kid that ended up at St. Mary's. Didn't work out too well there. Comes to the Cougars. I think he'll be a double-digit scorer. Andres Jakimovsky, who's kind of been in and out of the lineup with injuries. Kamani Husino, who's shown flashes, and Dylan Darling. Those four are four that are back for sure. Now they do bring in Joseph Yesefu, who's intriguing, right? Originally, a guy that at Drake, high-end scorer, bucket getter. Goes to Kansas, doesn't get used as much. However, when they were forced to use him, he played really well, but Bill Self, very stubborn, didn't end up using him very much, and now he's off to Wazoo, where I do think he can slide right into that TJ Bamba role, especially if Justin Powell decides to leave the collegiate ranks. Powell's already transferred 3 times now. Yesefu has an opportunity to come in and play like 30 minutes a game out of necessity, maybe even 35. Then we get that 5K Joe Yesefu from his Drake days, and it's a great option. They also bring in a couple of JUCO guys, a couple of unranked guys, Oscar Clough, Parker Garretts, Isaiah Watts, none of them that I think will be worth paying attention to initially, but they might develop into a bigger role out of necessity. And they are bringing a 20-point per game scorer by the name of Isaac Jones out of Idaho. So he's going to be the other piece that they expect to, handle it and do some things for them. He had a usage rate of almost 30%, a shot rate of almost 28%. Didn't shoot threes. He's about 6'10", about 250, can bang down low. Shot 64% on 2-point field goals, drew 7 fouls per 40, 4% block rate, top 100 in defensive rebounding rate. So a guy that, depending on, what Mo Gay does and losing all these bigs, Jones, maybe a little undersized at 6'9", 6'10" for the 5, but he's definitely a guy who has a lot of physicality and can handle it, especially against other Pac-12 teams. So I do like that get for them, but not enough to pull them out of the dungeon, if you will. There's a lot of work to be done still. They also are getting Jalen Wells, who is technically only a junior, out of Sonoma State, big time scorer from Sonoma State. So he's a guy that will also be vying for the TJ Bamba usage. I think he'll show flashes as well. He'll be a guy that's good. But this roster is really underwhelming. So I think what it'll be with Wells, it'll be a situation where if he's cheap, then we can use them. If they come out pricing them at, like, say, for some dumb reason, then we can't. I think ultimately the pecking order will end up some form or fashion of Yesefu, Jones, one of Jabe Mullins or Wells, Jakumovsky, and then everybody else. That's assuming that Powell and Gay are gone. If Powell and Gay return, then I think it's probably Gay, Yesefu, Jones, Powell, Mullins, Wells, Jakumovsky. So a lot depends on the Gay and Powell moves there, but right now the roster is pretty lackluster. I think losing TJ Bamba isn't really that big of a problem as people make it out to be. I think it's way worse to lose Deshaun Jackson, who I think you're going to see have a big year in Charlotte. And I think losing a guy like DJ Rodman, who can hit timely threes and contribute in other categories, is arguably more of a problem as well. And at the end of the day, losing a Dram Diong, a top 100 recruit, for nothing is also going to hurt quite bad, and their front court is going to suffer because of it. Isaac Jones was great at Idaho, but going up against upper tier competition night in and night out, that's a whole different ball game. So we'll see what happens. But it's the Cougars. If they're not very good, nobody will be sad about it, especially not me. That's the Pac-12 show. I feel amazing. We're just knocking these conference breakdowns out. I think what we'll do next week is SEC's a bear. I'm kind of saving that for the end because it really is an absolute bear of a conference to talk about. I think what we'll do I'll make it a surprise. It's either going to be a combo of the AAC and A10, or it's going to be the SEC. But we'll see. We'll see. Lots of work to be done. A lot still to determine. There's a metric F ton of prospects and players still in the portal. Draft stuff is going on. There's a lot of guys that we're going to be losing to the drafts, guys that are going to be coming back. So still a ton to be determined, and everything that we've talked about, like I said, will get us ready for this season. There were like 3 more big moves that happened in that conference. There's going to be, continuous stuff. I am going to be putting a roster sheet of sorts that will keep track of all the movements. So in addition to the shows you've watched of mine, you'll be able to look at the document and say, like, hey, let me look at Seton Hall. Here's what they lost. Here's what they got. Okay, cool. That kind of thing. So it works. Obviously, college football stuff in the works. Everything happening. Lots going on. I feel amazing. The last couple of weeks of really, having the grind off has revitalized me, refreshed me, and I'm really ready to hit the WNBA running and get into college football in basically, little under 2 months. So before you know it, it'll be here, and we'll be grinding each and every touchdown on Saturday morning. So I appreciate you guys' continued support on these. We're going to keep cranking them out. We're going to keep doing content, keep doing our thing until the season starts. Thank you very much, the FTN Network, and everybody who continues to watch the show. Make sure you slap that like button. Make sure you comment while watching it, either live or on demand. Thanks a lot, guys, and I'll see you next Wednesday for another edition of that CBB Super Show. See you.